And the final speaker against the motion is Frank Furedi, who is the provocative professor of sociology at the University of Kent. And Frank is a slightly unusual academic in that he is actively interested in taking academic debates and bringing them out into the public arena. He's particularly interested in the whole questions of authority and parenting and how we manage the relationships between children and adults in a suspicious society. He's the author of 13 books, including Paranoid Parenting. Frank.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Good evening, everybody. I don't know if you noticed, but whenever it comes to a discussion on parenting, everybody feels that they got a warrant to take their own personal story and to recast it as a grand philosophy. And on no other issues are we allowed to communicate such prejudices and such stereotypes as we do in relation to parenting. So Theodore happened to hear a couple of children swearing, and it's concluded that has never happened before in British society. You know, children of my generation would never use a four-letter word. That was unthinkable. Whereas now what we have is this epidemic, this pathology of children going around and swearing. And because of that, obviously, British parents are not doing their bit. Amy, on the other hand, concludes that in Western societies, children have too much choice. In fact, they have so much choice in Britain that middle-class children in London have literally their entire life organized for them by their parents. From the moment they get up in the morning for the first set of activities, as they kind of transfer around by their parents from this activity to the next, literally they got no free time to be children and to relax. The idea that somehow we live in a world where children have these incredible choices, so parents are laid back, chilled out, just get on with it, is a myth that bears literally no relationship to reality. And I think it's important to realize that when we're talking about Western parenting, what we are really talking about is intensive parenting. Western parenting is phenomenally intensive. Parents spend far more time with their children today than they did in any other generations. A working mother in the 21st century in Britain spends about 2-3 hours more a day looking after her children than a mother who stayed at home in the 1970s. That's how intensive it really is. And I think what's very interesting is that all these so-called Asian attributes that are brought out in Amy's books are not Asian at all. I mean, anybody that's been to New York, Westchester County, been to Cambridge, Massachusetts, will recognize those characteristics straight away. Just to give you an example of how this works, the other day a friend of mine who lives in New York told me a story about how her 4-year-old child has been on this waiting list for this high-powered preschool nursery, a waiting list. And she's been on it for months and months and months, and she really was at a loss to know how she could sort of train her child to get into a nursery so she can play with toys and develop. And at first, I thought she was exaggerating the way most parents do. So I went online, and I discovered this online service, which is called How to Ace at a Preschool Interview. This is in New York. This is not an online service for Chinese people or for Cambodian refugees. This is addressed towards Westerners. This is what they say. Education nowadays starts even before kindergarten, like age 3 months. The best and the most elite preschools don't just have expensive tuition, they have long waiting lists of eager parents who would love to send their children there in a heartbeat. If you're lucky enough to have a preschool call you and your child for an interview, you should do everything in your power to give the best possible impression. Now, that kind of intensive, high-powered parenting would be familiar to anybody that lives in North London, as it would be in most middle-class neighborhoods throughout the country. In London, as far as I can tell, there seem to be more tutors of young children than rats these days. Well, literally everybody I know has got a tutor working for them. So that's on this kind of stereotype that we're very laid back and relaxed. We care about self-esteem. We don't allow children to make too much choices. And then the other side of the stereotype is that in China or in Asia, parents are really hard-assed. I mean, they would never dream of spoiling a child, right? The fact that there are these little emperors in China and that there's been a protracted debate in China about how children are spoiled by their parents, a debate that's been going on for a very, very long time. It just happens to be an awkward fact. And if you happen to have gone to Shanghai, or if you go to Beijing, you'll find that the equivalent of the Westchester mummies and the Islington daddies in China have exactly the same parenting style. Maybe they say it in the Chinese language rather than English, as they do here. So it seems to me that what we're discussing at the moment are essentially two middle-class approaches towards parenting, rather than anything that is culturally different from one another. So it's very easy to get confused in the debate. My argument is simple and straightforward. Western parents are actually quite good at parenting. It's not rocket science. You don't need a PhD in development psychology to be a good mom or a good dad. There's no problem with Western parents. The real problem is that we do everything possible to make it very difficult for parents to have confidence in making judgment calls. We make it very, very difficult for parents to live the life of being a good parent because all of their intuition, all of their approaches towards life is continually undermined. So what are the problems with problems that we face? The first problem that we face in the West and Western culture is that we devalue parental competence. Time and time again, we continually pathologize what parents do. Politicians of all political parties seem to dine out on lecturing parents about their failures. And I can still see the moment, I think it was either David Cameron, but it could have been Gordon Brown, because on this they're at one, they are totally together on this particular kind of issue. I remember that typical sort of presidential lecture where you get that kind of look on that pained look on their face, that passionate care, that really pained look, as they say, you know, Jim, this is on the Today program, parenting is probably the most difficult job in the world. Right? And everybody gives them a standing ovation because it's such an obvious thing. Parenting is the most difficult job in the world. Well, actually, it isn't. I tell you, being a nuclear physicist is a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more difficult than being a parent. Being like a Formula One driver, on balance, is a bit more complex than changing the nappies of your son, right? But the very idea that we say parenting is the most difficult job in the world, which sounds really good, it's meant to communicate the idea that I feel for you, I take this very seriously, is actually another way of saying that you mom over there and you dad over there are unlikely to be up to this very difficult job, right? You mom and you dad need a phenomenal amount of parenting advice. You need a posse of experts to come in and hold your hands and give you what Cameron and Brown always call support. Right? So it seems to me that what we have under these circumstances are these very helpful reminders that tell us how difficult parenting is, which then makes parents very insecure, which then leads to what I think is the real problem, is that when there are so much pressure on parents to do this very difficult job, what they invariably do is begin to live their lives through their children. And as you live your life through your children, you begin to lose sight of just what it is that you ought to be doing. And because you live your life through your child, your parenting style becomes synonymous with your identity. And I think that's the really sad, tragic thing about the world that we live in. We forget about the real job of child rearing, and we become much more concerned about parenting as a cultural accomplishment of identity construction. And the reason why we have these debates, and we have debates around dinner tables all the time, is because these days, when your identity as a parent is so much part of who you are, you cannot simply say, well, Amy brings her child up this way. That's cool. I don't like it, but that's her business, right? Justine brings up her kid that way. Yeah, well, a bit slack, not what I would do, but fine, Instead of saying, I'm just leaving it at that, we do it differently, because maybe our children are different, our circumstances are different, we need to make a political issue out of who we are as parents. And the more we make a political issue out of who we are as parents, the more we take our eyes off the real job, which is just looking after our kids in the best way that we can. And I think that on a good day, Western parents do that really, really well. And the problem is not the fact that Western parents cannot bring up their kids. The real problem is that because of all these pressures that I've described, Western parents have lost the capacity to chill out, relax, and get a life. Thank you.